So did you build this house all at once or in pieces, you know?
Well, I've remodeled 3 times.
And what year did you build this?
I started in 47. I added this is the first piece we added on, is this breakfast nook.
It's nice.
Yeah.
Welcome. Shut the door, come on in.
I'm Diana Mall with Yesterday in Turner, the Historical Society here in Turner, Oregon. And this is Susan Roberts. She's also on the board of directors of the Yesterday in Turner group. And we're here with Melvin Baker, a pioneer resident of our city. We're going to get some history from him. Melvin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? When were you born? Where were you born?
I was born in a red house across from Ball Brothers called the Peck Place. The Pecks are named in this book.
All right. When?
The red house, right straight across the 2 small houses there now. But it was a red house, and the house leaked. So it must have been on the determined, because then my folks turned around and bought this house in Turner.
Oh.
My mother has wrote here on the note of this that they paid $600 for this house, and a year and a half later they sold it for $1,200.
Very good. So what year were you born?
1924.
And had your family been here?
My family's been here in Turner since I say 52. They came across the plains in 51, but he spent the first winter at French Prairie.
All right, yes. And then found out where they wanted to move.
Yeah, and then he came across Central Howell. Timothy Hay was the shoulder of his horse when he came across. And I never told the rest of them this story. But I, in '79, made a trip east, and we visited some people in Wisconsin at North Star, Wisconsin, and spent the weekend with them. And on Monday, my wife wanted to go to Madison because my father-in-law had come from Switzerland to Madison the first time and worked in a cheese factory somewhat. So she wanted to go to Madison. So we went from North Star here and went this way to Madison. And as we went across Madison, we came upon a log sign, and I have a slide of it. It was about as big as those 2 windows and about, we'll say, almost 8 feet tall of logs. And it says the site of the Baker Sawmill.
Baker Sawmill. Is that your family?
Yeah. My daughter-in-law found this in her research on the Bakers, that my great-grandfather, sold in October. He was married for the first time at 37 years of age, about January 2nd or 3rd. I'd have to go get it, and it's in a box, a tote box like that in that bedroom, and I haven't got out to get the dates in my head. But anyhow, I know it's right at the beginning. He went home to Christmas that year because he was living in Wisconsin. And while he was there, he met this girl and married her, and her name was Elizabeth Henderson Baker, and they were married And so he sells, according to my daughter-in-law, he sells the thing for $4,000 cash, Timber Holdings and the mill. That was a lot of money. And he builds a raft. It had to be a pretty big raft, because I can't verify this anywhere, but I have the blanket box that he built from the sawmill that he cut. It's out of maple, and each board is about this big. I mean, it's not pieced.
Yeah, old growth.
And it's upstairs, and my dad used it for a feed box. So that's why it's upstairs. My son's going to take it and restore it, but that's another thing. Anyhow, he put that blanket box on it. I say that he put his saddle horse on that raft too, and they floated to Perry to Shane. This is folklore. Now, the grandmother that lived with us told a lot. She died when I was 17, and when she last 2 years she lived with my folks, and my sister could not tell the stories, but I listened to my grandmother, and so part of this is anyhow. So after I retired, I went to the Oregon Historical Society on Thursday, because you can get in free down there. Did you know that?
Yes.
So I would go on Thursday wanting research on anybody that came across the plains in 1851. And the Historical Society, my grandfather hired a man by the name of Jess Harpo. The Oregon Historical Society challenged me that it's Harpool. Well, anyhow, this book says pool. P-O-O-L, right? It's right in here somewhere. And so, Mrs. Miller, isn't that her name?
Yes.
She said, well, it's probably the truth. I know that the people that lived across from my mother, where she was born in California, World War I, they were German, and they used their name, another name. Today, sure. their name is back German.
All right. Yeah.
So you understand what I'm saying. So anyhow, I find in the Oregon Historical Society, the 1st of May, 1851, they are at St. Joe, Missouri, which is 2 weeks from Independence, Missouri. And he also, Harpo wanted another 2 weeks earlier, so they started out with a large herd of cattle. So my grandfather had bought a herd of cattle, and he had drivers, and they started out with 3 wagons. One wagon was loaded with grain, because he wanted to get out on the prairie ahead of any wagons with this cattle, so they had feed across the country. Well, there was also, before they left Independence, there was another bunch of people there wanting to come to Oregon. So he talked, they all going together in the wagon to Oregon, and they voted in William Harrison Baker, the captain of the train. And I happen to know that he and Harpool rode ahead on saddle horses. So this is where the saddle horse comes back in. And anyhow, and my grandmother must have drove one of the wagons, and he brought two brothers with him. One brother was about 23, and the other one was about 20. And that was always a big question to me, where did he find the brothers? And anyhow, they went as far as Sweetwater, Wyoming. The cattle went to California to the gold fields. So we now know my daughter was very interested in the name Briggs, and when my dad and mother got married, they talked about their grandmothers. They both tell the same Indian stories. So apparently they were in the same wagon together. We now know a lot about it. My daughter comes up with the Briggs's wills, which were released about 2 years ago from California. They let so many wills out for public, and they tell a story. My mother had an aunt in California that she didn't even know existed. Aunt Laura. Cyrus Briggs left, according to my daughter, now she's chasing Briggs's, and she came up on Briggs's, and they left Massachusetts, and they came, and so he had a wife and 2 children, Briggs did, and Talitha Elvira, and I do not know what her name was, came into California in the same wagon train, because both told the same stories, according to my mother. And my mother lived with this grandmother about 12 years, so that would tell you about her story. Well, anyhow, Aunt Maggie was Talitha Elvira's daughter, and she owned a boarding house in Sacramento. And my daughter finds out that Cyrus Briggs and Talitha Elvira were married 3 years later, and she was running a boarding house in El Dorado. But anyhow, I shouldn't put them in it, but the Briggses owned 1,000 acres here and a 320-acre piece here. This was the horse farm, and this was the ranch where my mother was born. Well, anyhow, the cattle were here that winter. Now, go back to the story that my daughter-in-law finds that the baker that took the cattle to California tried working the gold fields for 2 years. And when he did come back to Oregon, he came and found his brother and gave him $4,000 in gold dust.
Wow. Wow. A fortune.
A fortune. And then he went to La Grande from here, and he had been to medical school, and they only had to go 2 years in medical school in those days. So he was a doctor at La Grande for years. The other brother disappeared, and throughout the period of time, Mrs. Reeves is Raul Baker's father is the son of the grandfather, William Harris's brother, and he came down and saw my grandmother in 1940, and Grandma was living with us, so that's why I saw Raul Baker. And anyhow, nobody knew for sure what the name of the brother was. They had all kinds of names. for him. And so I began to get letters from a woman in Grass Valley, California. And I read them. They smelt like Mormon. I chucked it in the 13, 5 of them. She writes me a letter, the 6th one, that I've been to Turner and I've been to Twin Oaks Cemetery, and she knew enough that that strip of relatives that the Bakers are buried in up in Twin Oaks, they're all related but 2 graves in that strip. Two blocks of graves. Maybe that's a better way of putting them. And anyhow, she said the last Baker put in was Perry Baker, so she goes to the Oregon Statesman, and the Oregon Statesman pulled an obituary on Perry Baker, and my sister and I were the only descendants because he was a bachelor. So she goes to the Oregon Historical Society. Well, I've been going to Oregon, so they knew who I was. So they gave them the address, and she came, and she said, in this letter to me, that we are a very prominent family. And are you the Melvin Baker that I want? And so I wrote her a letter, and we began to correspond, and William Harrison Baker was born in 1812 in the Ohio country on the border of what now is Ohio and Indiana. Actually, the town is in Indiana. My son has the rifle that William Harrison had made in Cincinnati, Ohio, probably around the time he was 21. Because he was 37 when he was married and came to and sold the farm and the sawmill in Wisconsin. And anyhow, that we find out that his dad's name was Marquis Lafayette.
Good historical name.
And so the one Baker that disappeared had no male heir. My dad's oldest brother spent a whole winter almost living in over at Walla Walla and various places, going to see everybody, because there's a certain set of names in the Baker family that every generation had. This one here carries the family name. That's my great-grandson.
That is so precious.
Yeah.
Yes.
You have quite a heritage coming across the plains and everything.
Well, I have, I'll say one more thing. The Ferrises, who was my grandmother Briggs, was born in Virginia. Edward Ferris came to the neck of Virginia, North Carolina, Tennessee, West Virginia. It's 10 miles to North Carolina, 29 miles to Tennessee, 40 miles to West Virginia. Edward Ferris came to this spot in 1735. And he and his brothers came through Jamestown in 1690, and they went into Maryland, and his father is buried in Maryland. And I'm going to drop the story there. And so go back to the Bakers. A Maurice Baker came to Jamestown in 1640. This is new to it, and it washes a lot of my story away because my grandmother maintained that we were German. We're not, we're English. Norman, yeah, Maurice Baker was from Normandy. That's English. So consequently and so as he moved into the Ohio country, the daughter-in-law comes up with a family in which would be Indiana. A picture with my great-grandfather came to Oregon.
That's a treasure. Wow.
Yeah, so we now know that piece of the yarn is truth to what my grandmother said we were German, and that my family had come from Jacob Baker, who was hushed and hired by the British and turned train coat. And it's very possible that the patents that she was, that Baker, that she's related to was of that, but it wasn't this Baker.
All right.
Interesting.
That is only supposition. That's enough of that story. And back to them. Now, go ahead and ask your question. That's good enough.
Well, you were born here.
Yeah, well,
And you've lived here almost all your life.
you know, the only time I haven't lived here is when I was in the Army.
And tell us about your Army service.
How old were you?
Nope, I
How
don't
old-
talk about my Army service.
Were you,
How old were you when you went into the Army?
19.
And that's World War II. Were you in European theater or the South Pacific?
Nope, I was in the United States the entire time. I was with the 8th Corps District. And I had a very important something that we did. I was with anti-aircraft guns. I wasn't going to tell you, but I'll tell you. I was anti-aircraft gun, and we were at White Sands, New Mexico. We guarded the first atomic bomb.
You have quite an amazing heritage.
Oh my
So,
goodness.
now, you mentioned that your grandmother thought that they were German, your mother and grandmother thought that they had German ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
During World War II, was there an attitude in Turner about the Germans who might...
German woman. World War I. The Schiffers,
Okay, yes.
the Aaronses, the Gaths, they're all German. And when Grandma Kunke came to visit, her daughter-in-law, Mrs. Ted Whitehead, who was the post office for years and years in Turner, Grandma Kunke would come, like when Grandma was at my house, they'd come and they'd sit there, go, talk German, and you'd say to Grandma, "You're speaking German." "I am not, I'm picking, this is part of your story. I am Pennsylvania Dutch," which is the truth, but it's German.
That's still precious, though, to have that heritage, because they fled from the Alsace-Lorraine, the Normandy area, and came on over.
My Pauline's mother, grandfather, came from Frankfurt, Germany, and he came to America first. He went to his sister in Illinois, and he worked a whole year, and he sent his wages back to Frankfurt, Germany, and Grandma Sadie came to America first class. She didn't have to go through Ellis Island. She got off the boat like a normal person, got on the train, went to to Illinois and was married to her husband. And they started out, they went to Nebraska. My mother-in-law was born in Nebraska. They went to Wyoming. They went to Idaho, Napa, Idaho. The National Geographic tells that John Yost, Fred John, brought the sugar beet to Napa Valley, and my grandmother, my mother-in-law, said that they raised sugar beets for several years in Idaho, and they shipped 3 gondolas back to Nebraska, sugar beets, before they put a plant up and people started in Napa. Now Napa's got a big sugar beet factory.
So you stayed in Turner except for your Army time.
That's right. I said I'd never live here.
You said you'd never lived. I love that. You went to school here in Turner.
Yes, I did.
And tell us about going to school. You walked to school.
Oh yeah.
And what did you do at lunchtime?
Went home.
Went home
Okay,
for
went home
lunch?
for lunch. All right.
Did most of the kids go
Yes.
home for lunch? Or
Yes.
all of them went home for lunch?
Yeah, except right during somewhere in the 30s, they had a school lunch program for a while. And a woman by the name of Mrs. Leap, and she lived in the caretaker's house on the Turner Tappan, where that old building that was the lunch or the dinner hall, there was a house there for the caretaker in my day. And she made the best mashed potatoes. I was always glad to be there to.
So you went over there and ate the school
I
lunch?
loved it. You see this bridge here?
Yes.
No, yeah, in my let's see. Now they built a road out here and over the concrete bridge, but this was the bridge that went over to the tabernacle and then went around onto this road like that. And my this thing has been owned by my mother's aunt, then my mother, and now me. So
It's precious.
yeah, I did.
Tell me, what are some of the major events that you remember happening here in Turner?
Well, then the flour mill burnt.
How old were you then? Do you remember?
Well,
Teenager?
I must have been 10 or 12 years of age. Why I'm going to tell you, my mother's brother, Herbert, was working in the flour mill. And my dad, and it's a 5-story building, we climbed the stairs up to the top floor, and he was shoving grain in a hole in the floor. And anytime I had a dream of falling through that hole, I knew I had a fever.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So, do you know what caused the fire?
Probably dust.
Okay. Was that, do you have volunteer firefighters back then? What?
They only had a 2-wheel cart with some hose on it.
Couldn't put the fire out.
That was rough.
And when you get over there to Turner, up here above us, the mill set here where there is a building here and a building here now. Well, the mill was right here. And this building here was up on the upper level. You see this creek comes around here like this? Well, and then it turns here and goes into the flour mill. And the power plant, Turner Power Plant, that building that's still there, that's where the power plant was in Turner. And when I was a kid, the lights went off at 8:30.
Oh, just automatically.
Automatic. They well, actually 8 o'clock.
What time did they come back on in the morning?
I have no idea.
Were they on when you got up and
Yeah.
went to school?
Yeah.
Yeah?
And
Did they generate the power from?
that mill race came, it's up here like this, and there was a falls like this.
Oh,
And that is what generated the power plant. And Turner Garden Club landscaped it all, had it all in shrubbery, had a little park here.
how nice.
And when Berkeley's got it, they filled it into the height that it is nowadays.
Okay.
Actually, and then when the high water came, in that day, that was all underwater.
Oh, for flooding. So flooding's always been an issue.
Yes. She tells a story in here of a team of horses nearly drowning in high water.
Oh,
So do you remember that it flooded every spring or winter here, or most winters?
Well, the worst one flood that we had, we had a heavy snow in about 1936. I remember that it was almost to my hips. In fact, I have heard and lots of barns and everything collapsed from the weight of the snow. And anyhow, then it began to thaw. They floated down the snow and slush down against the railroad bridge just down here, and then this thing really got water in it. There was even water here on this highway. And so the men went down there, and I don't know whether they used dynamite or what, but anyhow, they got it unplugged and got the water down.
did that stop you from going to school? Was that
Nope. And when I went to church jumping.
jumping the puddles?
Jumping up in the snow.
Oh my. So weather was a factor. What about, now Turner used to have a lot of industry and businesses and,
Yes, there was the flax company, Lynn Miles Flax Company, and many people, my mother and her brothers helped pull flax at Aaron's, and Uncle Harold was a big man, and Uncle Hub and my mother were of smaller stature, but my grandmother, Uncle Harry, she put him in a corset because his back hurt and pulling the flax, one of those Steve corsets. My mother laughed because the kids had known that, they'd have run him out of town and laughed.
Oh, too bad you don't have a picture of that. Oh, no.
so flax was a big thing
Yeah.
up until World War II or what?
It wasn't, it had to be before that because I don't remember the flax bit in Turner at that time.
Okay, but as a young child you do.
Yeah. The big thing in Turner, when I was a kid, everybody had prunes.
Prunes, okay.
Schiffers had prunes, the Staples had prunes, Aaron's had prunes.
Did you have a prune dryer in
You know,
there?
where they, about where the houses are being built now, Aaron's has had a prune dryer there. And if you've been up Summit Hill, as you're coming along like this, and then you go up like this, and go up, and then back down on Summit Loop, there was a dryer right there.
So you'd load up your prunes
Yeah,
and take them and then get them dried and come pick them back up?
Mm-hmm.
Could you sell them at that point, or did you use them for yourselves?
Well, we probably used all ours ourselves. In fact, I have, and my grandmother's dried prune cake recipe.
Oh, that's a precious thing to have. Have you made it? You
No.
cook.
I cook. In fact, I aim to. I've got the prunes.
All right. That'll be something to hear about. So people had prunes, and there was flax, and there was a flour mill, there was a lumber mill.
Yeah, there was 2 lumber mills. When you go down this road, and there's a White House, and the new house on this side, that's the Carlton Smith place. And this is an Aaron's place. You go just a little, there's a brush thing here. And actually, when I was a kid, that was a road. And there was a wooden bridge over Mill Creek on this side, and the sawmill set over there at the back. The last time I was down there, the sawdust pile is still visible.
That's exciting.
Amazing.
Yes. Now, was there a wrong side of the tracks in Turner? Like, you know, towns would say, oh, he lives on the wrong side of the tracks.
No.
Good. I'm glad we didn't have one.
No. I gotta tell one story quickly, very about now. Dr. Staples was a woman, Mary Staples, and she and the Staples, and that is the Garth Rouse place now. And Mrs. West Smith was a Staples. And Mrs. Morrison, Mrs. Childs, Dr. Staples, Mrs. West Smith, my grandmother, being a Virginia, was, because she was a Virginian, she was a lady, and their opinion. Mrs. Alex Morrison was the Sugar family attorney in San Francisco. He got $1 million for settling the Speckled Sugar original will without taxes.
My
And
goodness.
Mrs. Childs and them would all come to Turner in August because San Francisco is one of the worst months for fog. And the White House that's across with the chain fence is an R.O. Thomas house. And R.O. Thomas built the big house. This is 5th and Whipper Road, and that's the Cromwell house. This house was built by R.O. Thomas. And Mrs. and Wes Smith bought the R.O. Thomas house when they built and moved into this house. Then when this Wes Smith retired, he moved, she and him moved in with my grandmother, who was a widow, and lived with them until they bought the R.O. Thomas house on that side of Turner. And that house is where all these wealthy women were together.
All right. So Dr. Mary Staples, what kind of a doctor was she?
She delivered, according to her obituary, she had delivered most all the original whippers and Hunsakers and all that. She had been.
She was a medical doctor, and she delivered the babies and took care of things. All right.
I went to her funeral, her burial from San Francisco, and my daughter was only maybe 3 years of age, so my wife stayed in the car with the girl. And I got out and went over. Mrs. West Smith was 103, and she was there in the car, and I went and talked to her. And the undertaker came up to me, and he said, "Young man, will you help me carry her coffin?" So I went, and I was in the middle. And Walt Miller thumps me on the shoulder and says, "Young man, trade with me." So I get the tail in the back position. I'm with this side with my hand. And so when we took the casket off the hearse, we nearly dropped it. It was so heavy, we carried it 8 inches bent over to the grave.
Oh.
And it was a bronze casket, and it had a brass plate on Dr. Mary Staples.
Did you have a post office in Turner?
Yes.
What kind of, did you pick up your mail or have
Yes,
a
we
mail
picked
person?
our mail up,
Okay.
although we had boxes.
You had mailboxes. Okay. Did you have a newspaper?
Yes, I'll show it to you.
Okay.
All right. This is the
The post office.
this is the post office here, and the paper was here, against this building right here.
Turner Tribune.
Mm-hmm.
Did you read the newspaper when you were young?
No.
No.
Wonder, did you, when you were like a teenager, did you work? I mean, besides going to school, did you work in some?
And how did you get the newspaper? Did somebody deliver it?
The
Yes,
industries
I had.
around here?
I did. Now, there was a dairy in Turner by Art Robinson. That's on 5th Street. And I started working for him when I was 10 years of age. I drove the cows from the other side of Whipper over down past to the bridge and over the bridge to where my folks lived. We went down there. I went down the alley. Then I went down there, and what's now 7th Street, 8th Street, and all that subdivision over here was the Miles Linen Company. There was a big red tin barn. There was a machinery factory, machine shed factory with thrash machines in it. And Art Robinson rented that 125 acres, and I'm the one that drove the cows. Went at 7:30 every morning, took the cows to pasture, and then at 4:30, when I got home from school, I picked the cows up. I had to go sometimes clear out to the White Bridge because they would be eaten there, and drive them back across that ditch and then up to Turner for 1 quart of milk.
1 quart of milk.
Oh, my.
And
Every day?
every day. And my mother always let me have the top cream because I'm the one that
You earned it.
I earned it.
How many cows were there? Like 10, 20?
Yeah, there was at least anywhere from 6 to 8 to 10.
So were they good cows? Did they follow you when you started telling
They
them?
were very, they knew the route. I really could turn them around and wouldn't sit somewhere until I got it. But I was the one that had to lock them in their stalls. And he had a cross herd. He had two jerseys. And you believe you me, Jersey cows have got a nasty temper.
Oh,
I carried a club.
did you?
If I had to go in and drop the wooden space so that they were locked in the stall, and when I finally got to where I walked in front of them and tripped the thing, because they'd try hooking me with their horns.
Ornery.
No,
Ornery.
no wonder your mom let you have the cream. Oh, that's amazing. What kind of social activities did you kids do?
Well, where the Turner Reservoir was our sledding area, we took the fence down every year. And we could just slide clear up almost. I shouldn't tell us. You asked about activity. We had the mayor's Harrison was running the grocery store in Turner, which was in the Oddfellow building, which was the old L. Robinson store. And we took our roller skates and we put them on 1x8s, and we would lay it, and they put the Turner Salem water line in. We would go out on top of the hill up here, and we'd enter the hill, and they had not sealed it in the bottom. And us kids would go from school and take our things and go through it. And I can remember one day Harrison coming, Mr. Harrison coming and talking to my dad, and my dad said, "Don't you kids go up there anymore." So when I worked for the city of Salem, I found out it cost city of Salem $1,100 to wash that pipe out. Yeah,
Well, it sounds like fun.
it was.
Not bad.
And we would buy, we were smart, we had watches, and we would allow 3 minutes, and then the next one you'd go through.
Did you get caught?
No.
Just people knew though.
Yeah.
Just let it slide.
I just never told the city of Salem that I was wrong.
So, the high school was right here in Turner also.
Mm-hmm.
And did they have like dances and things
No,
like
we
that,
didn't.
activities like
No.
that? No,
No.
you just went to school.
Just went to school.
Were you a good student?
All but typing.
Typing.
You had to take typing?
I don't know why, but I did.
So what did you do after you got out of the Army and came back?
I went to work for Berkman's.
Okay,
I worked for him for 24 years.
So, did you lived right here still, so you could
I
just
don't-
walk to work and everything?
I just walked to work.
Mhm. And you told us that you had built this home in 1941, is that right?
47.
1947, after World War II had ended and things were picking up.
My dad, we were renting a house that my dad had, and my dad gave the house to my sister, and so we moved in with Dad from, we'll say, about 3 months, but we had already started this house. And so when we moved into the house, we had put that wall up, this wall up in here. We had a footboard across the kitchen here. We had a hot plate on it, and we did have the kitchen sink, and we slept in that bedroom. And we moved here about, we'll say in April or May, and we had the construction toilet right out there. And for our wedding, first anniversary wedding, we bought the toilet for the wedding gift. We had built the septic tank and had it all ready for it. We were delighted to have indoor plumbing.
Yes.
So we built the house around us. And I have remodeled the house more than once. I have tore all this out in here. And originally this was all Furtex. There is 3 ceilings above in this house. We had a fire right after we finished the house in the garage, and it damaged the kitchen, and this was all smoke damage. And so I told the insurance company, don't tear the ceiling out, just put a new ceiling over top of it. Because I had made the house 8'1", and so consequently, I still have 8 feet in here.
All right.
You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
You didn't lose any ceiling. Yeah.
And this house, before I put the tin roof on it, everybody's snow had melted off, and of course it's insulated up there, but I contribute to 3 ceilings.
Okay. Melvin, you said we moved in here, you and your wife.
Yeah.
Where did you meet her?
I came home from the Army, we'll say, somewhere, probably in the 44, and I went to a basketball game, and 6 girls come up and flocked around me.
Were you in uniform?
I was in my uniform.
Okay.
Wait to hear about this.
I bet you were very handsome.
I can show you my picture.
Let's hear the story first.
And I'm 21 years of age, and they're all minors. And it was well drilled in us at that age that girls underage were jailbait. So I wasn't that interested in this bunch of young juniors, girls. And one of them was my daughter, my wife, and she on that Sunday after that was ranting and raving to her sister-in-law, and my sister-in-law bet her $5 that she'd marry me. And of course, she was absolutely wasn't that. And so my buddy lives here. He and I got out of the Army in 45, and he was nuts over a certain girl, so I made a blind date for, and this girl really made a play for me, but I made the blind date for her, for Johnny, and so I had to come up with a girl, so I went to the same church that Pauline did. It took me 2 hours talking her into going with me.
Where did you go?
We went to a Billy Graham crusade.
Did you?
The ballpark was where now the Salem post office is.
Yes. Yes.
It was in that building, that space. The building around Crusade was.
Mhm. And how long before you married her after that first date?
I would have married her sooner, but I said to her, and you deserved to have your high school education, so we waited till she was out of school, and that would be a year and a half later, and that's when we got married.
Was Turner a dry town?
At that time, yeah. But it wasn't, it's been a wet town off and on all through the, in fact, I have to read this, but I think this book tells that there was more than one beer parlor in Turner when in 1883.
What about the Elks and Oddfellows and things
No,
like
it was
that?
Oddfellows and Mason.
Oddfellows and Masons.
And it was the Rebecca's and the Eastern Star.
And
My
did you know
grandfather Solon was one of the pioneer Masons.
Were you a member of either of those organizations?
I refused to be.
Okay.
How
And you have to understand, Uncle Jay was a Mason, Uncle Hub was a Mason, and the Masons came to me more than one, wanting me to join, and I have a few pet peeves against Masons, so I'm not gonna, that's my own opinion.
That's fine.
That's okay. It was a big part of that pioneer
Yeah.
movement this way. So,
Mhm.
what about church activities? There were lots of churches in
Yeah.
town.
I went to the Christian church till I was 17. And I'm going to shortcut this story. It was Depression days, and they had a squabble in the Christian church. And I'm not going to enumerate on it. And my mother said we didn't have the money to go to Salem to church, so we would go to the Assembly of God, but we don't have to join them.
Oh.
And they were in the creamery at that time, the Assembly of God was, and the creamery was like this, and the door was here, and the door was here. And this was we'll say it must have been the office. And then you went in here, and this is where they had their church. This was the loading dock, and that was where the pulpit was. And so we go, this is close to, we'll say 11 o'clock, whatever it was, and we would sit on the front bench in front of the pulpit. As soon as they closed, we got up and we run out here. And several people that had been in the Christian church were now members of the Assembly of God. Mrs. Tom Heron, the black wall that is down here in the field, it's got the bad top.
Yes.
That nut came across the plains in 1843 or 44. They also, the people of the Blue Bucket Mine. If you, do you know the story?
Yes.
Okay. And they planted that. So when Mrs. Pancos, who was Mrs. Tom Heron, now Tom Heron and Solon Baker were the same age and went to school. And they went to Wetzel School, and they were 21 years of age. and they were still in the 8th grade. And that year, they were 21. They had 5 teachers so far that year. The boys that were 21 were marrying the school teachers. They had 5 of them. So they went to school, Solon did, and when they went in, the desk was up, let's say up front, and there was a chair with a saddlebag on by. But there was nobody visible. And about 10 minutes later, a man appears where he'd been, whether he was out walking in the woods or what, that's a question. And the rascals became, they had their rulers drilled, a wooden ruler, and they could bring them like this, and they fed them with clover seed, and they go rat-tat-tat-tat-tat-tat across the ceiling. They also took matches and made darts with them. And one set of boys did fur-lined the girls' toilet, one with the grade to their hides. My grandmother, I'll sidetrack the story here for a second. 3 of the board members had sons, 1 had girls, and this woman would come back from the toilet, and she was just frothing at the mouth, and my grandmother said, "It's too bad all your girls are, your boys are girls."
What kind of discipline would happen for pranks like that at school?
None.
None? Were there disciplinary things that did happen at school? No?
Yeah, they even one time, more than once, Coleman Tracy, Bill Ball, Uncle Jay, my Uncle Hud, my Uncle Perry would come. Uncle Perry lived with us. He was blind. They'd come and visit him. Pauline and I would sit over here at the table and listen to him tell the story. I'm telling, this is part of the stories they were telling. And Uncle Jay said to Bill Pearson one day, "How about the sign on the Odd Fellow Hall, Bill?" He said, "Why do you say that I painted that sign on the wall?" He said, "Your dad was the only one that had red sheep dip." And they told about frying, having chicken roast out at the brick house, which I showed them on last Friday, and that was their rendezvous. They'd steal chickens and have chicken and hooch. White lightning. And I won't name, but they were all respectable people. They were considered Turner's elite.
Did you have police back then?
They had a night watchman.
Night watchman, not a police.
He was George Gibbons. That was the last one. I don't know what was before him.
Right, okay.
The little house that's Delaney, and then 5th Street goes back to the bridge. There's a little house there. And the front of that that house is a 2-room house, and George Gibbons lived in that house when I was a kid.
Do you know what the night watchman's job was to do?
Nope.
Did you have rules about animals loose in the streets? Like dogs or horses or cats or?
No, dogs run wild.
Okay. When did you learn how to drive?
Army.
In the Army, okay.
you've lived in Turner almost
90.
over 90 years. When you think back over all those years, what would you, do you have like a best memory of Turner? Like what's, when you think of growing up in Turner, what immediately comes to your mind? Do you have just like one thought, or is it many thoughts?
Well, it had to be, my mother was, well, in those days, Depression days and everything, people visited regularly every day, figuratively speaking. Now, you take the Assembly of God Church, or the old Presbyterian Church. The next house is the Ferris house that they tore down. It was there. That Ferris was my grandmother's oldest brother. Now, Aunt Annie was a Pratt. And I've been back to Virginia, and I've met a lot of the Pratt. Pratts are very proper people.
All right.
Lois Pratt Ferris is 96, and she and I talk by telephone regularly. This is her here.
Oh.
She's 96.
Oh, wow.
She fell on June the 3rd. She fell 3 days later and broke both hips and her left wrist. She's home today. Last Sunday she had the best day since she fell. And this girl and I, and this is Nell, and Nell's mother is named after my mother. So we have a bond, and she and I bet that she'll be driving her car
Oh, boy.
at 96. Now, she lives 2 miles from Chilhowie. But when they put Interstate 81 down, they went right down through this canyon into Chilhowie. The house sits right here, 2 miles. This part of the family farm is now a suburb of Chilhowie. But this isn't. This has got a precipice. You're gonna get no road up that. And so she said after dinner the first time I was there to her husband, go put the Fordson tractor, put some kind of a lift on the back of it. And so as we started up the hill, Gail says to me, this is where we raise our tobacco. Now, Gail and I hiked the Blue Ridge. He took me up on the Blue Ridge to show me Pioneer Log Church and things like that. And Gail walked behind me, and the scriptures just flowed out of it. He made me ashamed of myself. And he would have drove me to drink if I had to live with him, because if the house had caught a fire, he'd have stayed on and finished his coffee at the table before he got up and left. He was just that laid back. Well, anyhow, Pauline says to her, because they're riding on this lift, I'm standing up behind him talking to him on the tractor. And Pauline said to him, who plants the tobacco? Lois says, I do. And Pauline said, I couldn't believe she is such a lady. She would sit on the back of that, and then you have to take, they raised their son has 2 greenhouses that are acreages. And their first crop every year they have in those greenhouses is pharmaceutical tobacco. They raise tobacco till it's about this big, and then it's sold to the pharmaceutical people for research as well as what they want out of it. Makes big money at it.
Interesting. Well, you know, it's almost time for us to call quits to this for today because we have to go on to the other program at Cascade. But there's so much more we need to ask you. Would we be able to come back?
Well, if I'm here,
All right.
You'll be here.
well,
This is just fascinating. You have so many great memories, and we appreciate that you are sharing them with us.
Yeah, it's just fascinating.
I'll tell one story quickly. There was a White House, a two-story Italianate house. Now, do you know what I'm talking about when it's an Italian house?
I do.
The man, the name was Joe Hall, lived in it. And as you go out Whipple Road, on this side of the road, disregard the London trailer houses, but there was up here, there was a house that Delzells, all kinds of people have lived in that house. That was originally the Joe Hall farm. Then there's a driveway that goes back to the dairy farm. Then this is a Miller place. And all this land across that's in corn was Miller. Now the Millers, Grandma Miller was a cook. And the cook, her grandfather was the only white man present at the last of the great chiefs of the Talapuli. And he's buried somewhere across the road from Cook Road. And my dad's the only white man, lest there are some cooks. But Grandpa Cook showed my dad the grave. And I can remember when the four professors came from Oregon State to our house begging him to show them the grave. Now my grandmother had great respect for the Indians. In fact, she even fed an Indian chief for three winters.
That was nice.
So he came for dinner one day, breakfast one day, and she said to him, "Tuckerman, I'm not going to feed you anymore. Your wives are stealing me blind." He stalks out of the house. I told this story to them. He stalked out of the house, and the next thing she knew, he was coming up the lane. And then you know the lane is quite a distance back to the house. And he was driving these wives in front of him with goose eggs, watermelon pickle jar, and everything. He comes in, he sits down at the table, and he says, "Now you feed me, they'll poison me."
Oh.
You have such stories.
Oh, wow.
We need to make sure that these are shared for the future generations.
Yeah, so the one field back of the house, there's 10 springs. And it's called the Mound Field by the family. And all the way around the field is Indian graves. Now the Indians camped at this 10 springs. They also camped at the springs where I showed you folks where they tracked the Crooked Horseshoe back to Salem on the Delaney murder. And that was a day's journey with the Indians from there to there. And this field had a lot of Indian graves. My grandmother purposely had them obliterated because she did not want the Indians disturbed. Because she had great respect for them.
That was a precious
And she could even speak enough jargon.
To communicate with them?
Mm-hmm.
That is wonderful. What a heritage. Thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
Yes, Melvin, it's been great. Love to do some more talking in the
Yes.
future.
I want to hear more stories.
Yeah. Really good
Stay
stuff.
for 1 second.
Oh, this is you, isn't it?
This is me.
This is
This is an artist. Is from Carmel, California. He's famous for doing cats and dogs.
Well, I think you did a great job.
Didn't you?
It looks as good as a
People.
photograph.
Carmel, California.
Beautiful.
See, I knew you were a handsome young man.
Yes. Wonderful.
Great story. Thank you so much, Melvin. Really enjoyed listening to all the history. Got a fabulous memory for names and dates.